All right, welcome to a bonus podcast of Tom Gresham's Gun Talk. You can always hear more Gun Talk at guntalk.com, and check out, we're on Facebook, we do the Twitter thing. You can get us a lot of different ways. As the nation celebrates the 100th birthday of President Ronald Reagan, I thought it was time to dredge up an interview that my father did with President Reagan in 1983. What made this so special was that this was an interview done for Sports Afield magazine when Dad, Grits Gresham, was the shooting editor for Sports Afield magazine. But the interview he got and the story that was unveiled during this interview made national news. I'll give you a little bit more background about that on the backside of this. Now understand, 1983, Dad was using a small cassette tape recorder, put it in the Oval Office. It was a one-on-one interview with President Reagan, with the press secretary, Larry Speaks, there. And it's funny because Dad said when he got in there, he pulled out his tape recorder, and President Reagan said, well, if that one doesn't work, the ones that we have rolling will pick it up, so don't worry about it. So there's Grits with Ronald Reagan, and they talked about a number of different things, and we'll share some of that later. But the big story was one that Larry Speaks later said, I'd never heard that story before. And because the recording is not great, I've tweaked it as best I can. Let me tell you what the story is, and it'll help you follow. Basically, Reagan was a sportscaster in Des Moines, Iowa, sleeping upstairs and with the windows open in summer, and he heard voices out on the street. He heard this woman say, just take what you want and leave me alone. Reagan had a 1911 a Colt 45 automatic pistol that a friend had given him. He stood up, and I remember Dad telling me that the president stood up out of his chair behind his desk in the Oval Office, and he starts pantomiming this whole thing while he's telling the story. And he said he pulled back the curtain and saw a man holding a gun on this nurse. So Reagan sticks this pistol out the window, pulls the curtain back, sticks it out the window, aiming it down. That's why during the story he says that the gunman couldn't see Reagan. He could just see the gun, and tells the whole story. So I'll let you hear the story, then I'll come back and fill in the backside, because believe me, the press did not like the story of a president who had used a personally owned firearm to save an innocent person. Here's that interview now.
When I was sports announcing in Des Moines, Iowa, and a friend, widow of a man who'd been in the military, gave me his 1911 model automatic, 45 automatic. And I had an apartment right on the street, and next door to a hospital, and across the street a nurse's home. And I was on the second floor. And I was lying there half asleep, and I heard voices. And I was not paying much attention around the street down below, and it wasn't common to hear that, except that there was something about the tone. And I found myself saying, what if I were a witness, something had happened? What would I say I had heard? And just about that time, I heard her voice say, take anything but leave me alone. And I went to the window, and right beneath my window was this gal with her arms in the air, and a suitcase sitting down there, and this fellow with a gun on her. She was a nurse coming back from a case. And I got my 45, and I stood back. I'm up there in the dark window and put that 45 around and down, and I said, drop it and get going. And he rode around with the gun, and so he couldn't see anybody, but he saw that 45 pointing at him, and all of a sudden he just turned and ran. He didn't drop the gun, he just turned and ran. And I told her, I said, wait a minute. I put on a robe and I went down. I didn't tell her that I didn't have any ammunition for the gun. But he didn't know that. And I took her over to the hospital and went back.
Okay, so President Reagan uses a 1911 to save this woman, and he doesn't even have any ammunition for it. Now, here's the real story here. When this came out, and Dad published this in Sports Afield, they put out press releases on it. The media said, oh, that's just another Reagan story. That can't be true. Not possible that it's true. the media said, well, we would already have known about that. We've investigated everything about the president. We never heard that story before. He made that up. But the story was out there across the country. And then, lo and behold, this woman comes forward, Melba King, and she says, I was that nurse. I was 22 years old. I didn't know who the young man was who saved me. And I certainly didn't know that he went on to become a famous actor and the President of the United States. So we have a United States president who used a personally owned firearm to save someone, and how appropriate that during the year when we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 1911 pistol, it was 100 years ago this year that the War Department adopted that pistol as the official sidearm. It's also the 100th birthday of President Reagan. Be sure to check us out at guntalk.com. And remember, we're there every week, every Sunday, 3 hours for live talk radio coast to coast on Tom Gresham's Gun Talk.